We will acquaint you with a unique world, a world of fierce warriors and wonderful romantics, a mysterious and legendary world, a world of poets and government officials, a world of great empires and nomadic culture, a world of eternal blue sky, the Turkic world. From you, prudent people will come, scribes and prophets, tsars and khans. Great Tengri. Since ancient times, people who lived in different parts of our planet traded with each other. At first, it was just an exchange of items that were in the same place, but they were not in another place: salt, precious stones and gold, medicinal herbs and perfumes. Then people began to exchange goods: food products, livestock, bronze and iron, valuable furs, fabrics, cattle and many others. Originally, there was a regular exchange, and then buying and selling for money started. Trade appeared, and with it appeared markets, bazaars, trade fairs, trade routes that connected countries, towns and nations. Some route sections merged, road lengthened to the west and east, north and south, capturing more and more territories. So in Europe and Asia, Eurasia, the Great Silk Road appeared. In the middle of the 2nd century BC, across ancient Kazakh steppes and towns, it passed as a transcontinental main road, providing a dialogue of cultures and civilizations for many centuries. An ancient Chinese official, Jian Xian, played crucial role in formation of the Great Silk Road as the Trans-Eurasian main road. In 138 BC, he went with a dangerous diplomatic mission to nomads of Yuan tribe to persuade them to become allies of Han Chinese Empire in fight against Xiongnu nomads. Jian Xian became the first Chinese who visited Central Asia, Sogdiana and Bactria, present Uzbekistan, Tajikistan and Afghanistan. There he learned that there was enormous demand for Chinese goods and saw a lot of things about which the Chinese didn't have any idea. Returning to China in 126 BC, he submitted to the emperor a report on benefits of direct trade between China and Central Asian states. Though Jian Xian was unable to obtain military aid from the USG to fight against the Xiongnu, the information collected by him was considered to be extremely important. In 123–119 BC, Chinese troops, all by themselves, inflicted a defeat on the Xiongnu, securing the way from China to the west. Since that time, we can talk about functioning of the Great Silk Road as a through route which connected all great civilizations of the Old World: China, India, Middle East and Europe. There was a huge system of caravan routes with length of more than 7,000 kilometers. It existed more than 1,500 years, much longer than other long-distance overland trade routes, for example, the way from the Vikings to the Greeks.
Именно с 5 по 7 века, по 8 века,
Just from 5th to 7th century, to 8th century indeed, there was the most intensive trade. They traded silk, but silk was like an equivalent of gold and silver, and silk became the binding basis for a purring economy in the Turkic Khaganate over cattle breeding, over agriculture, which was called prestige economy. That is, to put on silk dressing gowns that were not necessary for soldiers in principle. They were absolutely uncomfortable to wear, and Kagans could only wear them. One day, Xuanzang visited the steppe, western area as they called, and then he went to Central Asia and described a Kagan, was wearing a big green silk dressing gown, and his 200 warriors were dressed in brocade. It was such a big, magnificent escort. Calling out to peoples of the earth countries, the sacred region is open to all who pave roads of peace to us, great ways of new milestones. Alisher Sirajov. The Great Silk Road included lapis lazuli road, on which a beautiful blue stone lapis lazuli was transported. The precious stone was highly valued in Egypt, Babylon, and Iran. Netherite Road became the road for carrying a beautiful netherite stone to China. Decorations for the emperors and noblemen were made of it. There was a sable road. On it furs were carried. In the middle of the first millennium BC, a steppe road began to develop. On it, silk was imported to Western countries.
Великий шелковый путь – это не древнее название, оно вошло в обиход уже в 19
The name Great Silk Road is not an ancient name. The term Great Silk Road entered the historical science in late 1877 and was coined by a famous German geographer, Ferdinand von Richthofen. Silk invented in China was the main subject of trade. It determined the name of the road. Since then, this successful name had become an original card of amazing achievement of mankind, thanks to which nations began to trade, transfer scientific achievements to each other, and share with cultural and religious values.
торгового пути. Это была смычка двух цивилизаций.
Although routes of the Great Silk Road changed, there were two main routes connecting the East and West. The Southern Road, from the north of China across Central Asia to the Middle East and North India, and the Northern Road, from the north of China through the Pamir and the Aral Sea region to the Lower Volga and the Black Sea basin. Between the southern and northern roads, there were several connecting and intermediate routes. At exchange of goods between East and West, goods were mainly carried from East to West. In the Roman Empire, during its heyday, silk fabrics and other oriental products were in great demand. Since the 11th century, the whole Western Europe began to buy oriental goods. After the Arab conquest, the goods were consumed in the whole southern Mediterranean, down to Spain. One day, the emperor of Byzantium bought his wife a nightshirt of Chinese silk. There was a trial in parliament. What did you spend money for? Silk was expensive there, of course. It was just more expensive in Europe. Silk was given to a Chinese minister who honestly worked all his life and retired. And everybody admired how generously he was gifted, because it was enough for him to the end of his life and for his family. Silk so.
Вот это так стоил этот шелк.
Showing peaceful neighborhood for that militant time, the Great Road opened the culture of the ancient East to everybody. Alisher Sirajov. For successful functioning of the Great Silk Road, it was necessary to provide political stability throughout its extension. This could be achieved in two ways: either by creating a vast empire which would control all the main Eurasian caravan routes, or by division of the world between the major powers capable to ensure safety of the trade. In the history of the Great Silk Road, there were three short-term periods when it was almost completely controlled by one state. By Turkic Khaganate in the late 6th century, by Genghis Khan Empire in the late 13th century, and by Tamerlane Empire in the late 14th century. However, because of long extent of the ways, it was extremely difficult to combine them under a single control. More often, there was a division of the world between a few large countries. Silk fabrics and raw silk were the main goods on the Great Silk Road. They were the most convenient for transportation over long distances, because silk was lightweight and very valuable. In Europe, it was sold more expensive than gold. China, the birthplace of silk, held a monopoly for silk products until approximately 5th, 6th centuries. But then, it remained one of the centers of production and export of silk, along with Central Asia. In the Middle Ages, China also exported porcelain and tea. Middle East and Central Asia countries specialized in manufacture of woolen and cotton fabrics, which were transported along the Silk Road to the east, to China. From South and Southeast Asia countries, merchants brought to Europe spices, pepper, nutmeg, cinnamon, cloves, etc., which were used by Europeans for conservation of foods and preparation of drugs. Functioning of the Great Silk Road promoted acquaintance of different nations with new consumer goods. Mainly Western Europe obtained benefit from their distribution. Silk fabrics increased personal hygiene of the Europeans, releasing them from lice. Spices were widely used for preparation of drugs and for conservation of non-perishable foods. Paper, made according to recipes from China and Central Asia, began to display parchment and papyrus, reducing the price of copying manuscript books. Each camel was loaded with approximately 200 kilograms of silk. Imagine how many billions were there. Each caravan had 400 camels. There were billions of dollars. This line was continuous. It went even through Almaty. And on the way, of course, they paid off. Everybody strove to get this line. Therefore, when a caravan passed, a lot of money flowed there. The whole scope of trade conducted in Europe or Iran was very small. One caravan consisted of 400 camels. Each camel carried 200 kilograms of silk. One roll of silk was enough to a man for his whole life. It was the Great Silk Road, of course. Porcelain and weapons, etc. were carried. It was the Great Silk Road. Of course, porcelain and weapons, etc. were carried. The same line went back, and no merchants had weapons. They only had knives to cut meat, and that's all. The Silk Road is a canonical concept of world history, a poetic image of the caravan of camels loaded with silk and going in the desert from China to Rome. Valerie Hansen. Exotic beasts and animals became subjects of international trade. Famous quarter horses from Central Asia, from Eastern countries, elephants, rhinos, tigers, lions, hunting birds, etc. Dried fruits grown in Central Asia, raisins, melons, dried apricots, oriental sweets, were carried along the trade route. They began to sell seeds of vegetables growing in some countries. So Bulgarian and Chinese pepper was spread to other countries thanks to the Great Silk Road.
Эти связи были полезны не только в
These
области
links were
культуры,
useful
они
not only in the
влияли
field of
и на
culture.
мирные и
They influence on
добрососедские
peaceful and
отношения
good
между
relations between
странами.
countries.
Раскопка таких городов, как Тарас,
In sites of Taraz, Balasagun and Ispijab, during excavations, were found remains of dwellings and monasteries, which were places where people of different religious confessions held meetings. Although they practiced different religions, in the field of culture they became familiar with values of foreign cultures and were evolved together. They competed with each other in the art of manufacturing cultural objects, works of art. And thereby they contributed to development of world culture. One of the poets of that time wrote the following verses about what nations were famous for.
какой народ чем был славен.
You should know that in poetry there are no better writers than the Arabs, and sons of ancient Greece chose medicine as their arena. Indian people are strong in sorcery. Mathematics and music are Romans' inheritance. Power of China is firm in drawing. But the world has never seen more skillful artists than Baghdad masters.
Когда мы говорим о том, что развивается в тюркский период именно Великий
When we
Шелковый
talk
путь,
about development of the Great Silk Road in Turkic period, we should say that the Turks were communicative. They settled and therefore lost their age-old contact with nature.
с природой. Они становятся толерантными к другим религиям, которые навязывают какие-то определенные догматы.
They became tolerant of other religions, which imposed some specific dogmas. And so there was a separation, let's say, of cattle culture, nomadic culture from the roots, which once had formed perhaps from the Neolithic period, when there was a separation of agriculture from cattle breeding. Probably they were more intensively developed in Scythian Saka period.
Получили свое развитие в скифо-сакский период.
And also life is beautiful because you can travel. Nikolai Przewalski. Influence of the Great Silk Road on development of international relations. The Great Silk Road facilitated development of trade relations between nations. It also promoted establishment of diplomatic ties between countries of East and West. According to Chinese manuscripts, the Silk Road began to develop since the middle of the 2nd century BC. Ambassadors sent by Chinese Emperor Yu Di in 138 to Western countries came back only after 13 years. Trade relations between China and Western countries through Kazakhstan and Central Asia began in 150 after return of this delegation. Finally, caravans with goods went from the west to China.
Благодаря торговле в 568 году
In 568, thanks to trade, diplomatic relations were established between the Turkic Khaganate and Byzantium. The two countries established trade and diplomatic alliance with each other in opposition to Iran. Exchange of ambassadors strengthened international trade. At first, Chinese silk was highly valued abroad and necessary for the needs of the court. In trade, it served as money, and it was an excellent gift. For example, the Shah of Iran received as a gift silk clothes decorated with embroidery on behalf of the Chinese emperor. The Great Silk Road promoted not only the development of trade between countries, but also the creation of atmosphere of friendship and trust. The Great Silk Road routes in the territory of Kazakhstan. Kazakhstan section of the Silk Road interconnected the west and the east. The Semirechye, 7 rivers, located in the southeast of Kazakhstan, was a kind of gateway to the east. Scientific studies showed that through Semirechye there were several routes of the Great Silk Road, which led to the west. The main southeastern road to the east passed through Semirechye. It went from Taras to Almaty, then through Shelek, Sumbe, Jarkent, Ilebalik. It went to the east. Another northeastern direction from Almaty through Jakselik, Kapchagay, Shengildi, Altyn-Emel, Dungene, Koylik near Lake Alakol, passed through Janga Gate and went to the east.
Долгое время шелк-сырец, он не был в Восточно-Римской империи, его не знали, как его изготавливать. Получали только из Китая.
For a long time, silk was raw. It wasn't available in the Eastern Roman Empire, and they didn't know how to make it. It only was received from China. And from China, it was delivered by nomads beginning from the Han Jian, from the Huns, went from the Hethalites. It went through the Jujuans and then through the Turks. It was such a chain. In Byzantine Sosas Irindi, there is a story about two certain Iranians who came to the Roman emperor and said, "We can bring you worms, and from the worms come out very many larvae, which will need to be put on a mulberry tree. And so you will have silkworms." And they really, in a contraband way, brought them from some far distant country. It was unknown from which country. For example, Stein thought it was Eastern Turkestan, the present-day territory of Xinjiang, China, from Hatang, Gaochang, Turpang. In these principalities, silk was produced, not only in China, but it was also produced here.
Стейн считал, что это Восточный Туркестан, современная территория СУАР КНР, города Хатан, Гаочан, да, то есть Турфан, вот эти вот города, значит, ну вот в этих княжествах как бы производили. Да, действительно, в этих княжествах производили, не только в Китае производили, но и здесь производили, да.
An unabated background sings wiping a thin chain of traces, but the caravan meanders like a long chain on the road, impassable for loners. Marina Chekina. The Great Silk Road played an important role in development of geographical knowledge. Only after construction of this, through trade route, the Europeans and the Chinese first learned about each other and got at least a rough idea about all civilizations of Eurasia. Western Europe received relatively accurate knowledge about size of Eurasia and about features of various countries of the East only in late 13th, in early 14th centuries, when some European merchants and missionaries, including famous Marco Polo, could pass the Silk Road from end to end and write books which were of great interest in Europe.
Закат Великого Шелкового пути связывается...
Fall of the Great Silk Road was firstly associated with development of commercial navigation along the coasts of the Middle East, South and Southeast Asia. In 14th, 15th centuries, maritime trade became more attractive than overland caravan routes that became dangerous. The sea route from the Persian Gulf to China took about 150 days, while the caravan route from Tana, Azov in Hanbalik, Beijing, took about 300 days. One ship carried as much cargo as a very large caravan of 1,000 pack animals. As a result of these factors, in 14th century, the Great Silk Road finally ceased to exist. Only some parts of it continued to operate for a long time. For example, the caravan trade between Central Asia and China ceased only in 18th century.
В принципе, об этом мы вам расскажем в будущих наших сериях.